Pride Month to all of you. Interestingly, we're going to start Pride Month with the story of Lazarus, as you already heard in the call to worship. I'm going to be reading from John 11. So we're going to hear the story of Lazarus, and then we're going to hear how a miracle can bring loveliness and fear. So listen to the story. Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench because he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upward and said, "God, I thank you for having heard me. I know that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his feet and hands bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Many of the community members, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what Jesus did, believed in him. But some of them went to the religious authorities and told them what Jesus had done. So the chief priests called a meeting of the council and said, "What are we to do? This person is performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and destroy both our holy place and our nation." But one of them, who was high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all. You do not understand that it is better for you to have one man die for the people than to have this whole nation destroyed." He did not say this on his own, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus was about to die for the nation. And not for the nation only, but to gather into one the dispersed children of God. So from that day on, they planned to put him to death.
Ooh. Good morning. Thank you, Carol, for that beautiful reading and your amazing frog shirt. I wish I had that on myself. It's good to be here with you all today. This morning, we continue through the resurrection season, which does not end with the Easter story, but is only just beginning. A few weeks ago, I spoke to you about the importance of the resurrection and how it revives back to life that which we previously thought was dead. And we talked about the things in our lives and in our world that might feel dead to us in the moment, that we'd like to bring back to life if we had the opportunity. And today we have the story of Jesus' friend Lazarus, the not quite as well-known story of resurrection. Jesus arrives in the town of Bethany to receive the news that his friend who had been ill is now dead and has been dead for 4 days and is already buried in the tomb. His sisters, Mary and Martha, are angry at Jesus for not coming right away when he heard that Lazarus was ill. What was the point of Jesus showing up now, 4 days after death, with all hopes of a miracle long past? Jesus, as he so often does, reminds us once again why we shouldn't completely give in to hopelessness, and that no truly worthy cause is worth giving up on. Amidst his own grief, he rolls away the stone that covers the tomb and commands the revived and resurrected Lazarus to come out and rejoin his community. With his words, Jesus begins the resurrection, but the most critical part of this story happens after Lazarus comes out of the tomb. Alive but still draped in the bondage of his burial cloth, Jesus tells the community as they are being reunited with him to unbind him from these garments that are now constraining him. Jesus brings Lazarus back to life, but it's the job of the community to fully set him free. Lazarus' unbinding might come as a comforting image to many of us in this room, who at this moment might feel bound and constrained by so many things happening around us, in the world and in our own lives. Just like there's plenty in the world we'd like to revive, there's also probably a lot of things that we'd like to unbind ourselves from, to unbind our loved ones from, and to unbind our communities. We all wish to be unbound, to be set free in some way. Maybe it's from student debt. Maybe it's from trauma we've experienced in our past. Maybe it's from poverty being experienced in our communities and around the world. I'm curious to know what is it that you would like liberation from? What is it that you would unbind if given the opportunity?
Are we supposed to answer?
Yeah. Feel free to shout it out. What's that? Medications, dependence on medications, yeah. Yeah.
Very much miss the days where, as a teacher in a school, I didn't have to worry about having gun lockdown drills
Yeah.
and the potential of gun violence.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't grow up with that.
Yeah.
So I wish it were not.
Yeah.
So
Unbound from gun violence, yeah, and the fear of gun violence in our schools.
Oh, churches, oh, Senator, unbinding the violence against from churches, school, or any community.
Yes, unbound from violence, yeah. Today, as we said earlier, I have the pleasure of preaching to you on what is the very first day of Pride Month. Hard to believe because in New York City today, I woke up and it was about 48 degrees, which I think is the coldest June temperatures I've ever experienced. But it is June, according to the calendar. It is the first day of Pride Month, an annual tradition that pays homage to the Stonewall riots, something that happened just 2 miles south of where we are right now in June, 56 years ago. Modern Pride has become a time of celebration and pageantry, but that is not the way that it started. In those June evenings of 1969, the patrons of the Stonewall Inn were crying out in grief and anger, tired of living in a society that constrained them in the same way that Lazarus is constrained by the burial cloth that his community has wrapped him in. And while I'd love to take credit for this brilliant analogy, I am far from the first person to draw these parallels between the Lazarus of the Bible and the modern LGBTQ+ community. For decades, queer Christians have felt liberation in the way that Lazarus is commanded by Jesus to come out of the tomb. In the same way, so many of us have been called to come out of shame and secrecy to be received by a loving community. And while there are certainly many milestones and victories that we can celebrate this Pride Month, there are unfortunately still many ways that this community still feels bound, as if we are trying to live a vibrant and resurrected existence while still being draped in things that remind us of death and destruction. As we begin to don our rainbow flags and partake in our rainbow communion, we in this country realize now more than ever just how fragile and precious those gains and progress over the last 56 years are. While there's always joy within the LGBTQ community worth celebrating, we're acutely aware now more than ever of all that's at stake in this moment and in the months and the years to come. As we get ready to march in parades, we also acknowledge the threat that comes from our government, a government that aims to systematically strip away hard-won rights of queer and trans people all over this country. Like Lazarus and the grieving community that sat helpless at his bedside, we anxiously await the hope and the liberation that comes with Jesus' arrival. We await the opportunity to be brought back to life just at the moment that all feels dead and forgotten. We yearn to be set free from all that binds us and keeps us from living a fully safe and thriving existence. And no matter how you identify, we can all imagine the pain and grief that the community of Bethany must have felt in those trying days of Lazarus' illness and death. In times of hopelessness and uncertainty, we can resonate with Mary and Martha in their despair and their frustration with Jesus arriving so late. After spending so many days trying to heal and then grieve for their brother, we have felt similar exasperation in our most challenging days, not being able to feel the presence of God in our midst at the moment when we most needed it. Many of us know what it feels like to cry out to God saying, "Where were you? Why weren't you here when I really needed you?" On the surface, it would seem that Jesus is the hero of the Lazarus story, the Savior who arrives at the last hour to completely right all that had gone wrong. And while Jesus certainly accomplishes something miraculous in the raising of Lazarus from the dead, it's important to remember that it's his community, his family, and his neighbors that are called to unbind him from the burial cloth, the final symbol of that which restricts him and prevents him from walking anew in his resurrection. When Jesus calls to Lazarus to come out, he is not simply bringing him back from the dead, but he is also freeing him from an existence of loneliness and isolation. He calls him out of the solemn and death-filled tomb so that he may rejoin his community and live freely, unbound by the embrace and celebration of his community. Jesus begins the work of healing by calling Lazarus out, but he isn't fully free until he is received by friends and neighbors willing to liberate him from the last remaining symbols of his captivity. The calling of the church community is to be active participants in the freedom and the liberation of all of our members. When any one of us is feeling confined and isolated, cut off from the acceptance and the embrace of their neighbors, the church has a responsibility to welcome in all people with open arms and to be ready to do the work of unbinding them from all forces that wish to keep them confined in the stenches of death and rejection. Liberation is not a solo act, but a communal one. In this story, it's accomplished not by Jesus or Lazarus alone. It is not accomplished solely through the love of Lazarus' immediate family members, but with the active participation of the entire community. One of the more beautiful legacies of Pride is that it represents an all-inclusive fight for liberation and freedom for all people who are suffering and living on the margins. It may specifically highlight the struggles of those who are marginalized by their sexual and gender identity, but in its most pure form, it is an acknowledgement that none of us are free until all of us have been liberated. It empowers all of us to be able to walk away from all of that which confines us. If you've ever felt the constraints of living in poverty, if you've known the violence that is racial or gender discrimination, if you've ever faced fear, uncertainty, or rejection simply because of where you were born, the Pride story can speak to you as well. Because pride means having the right to truly live your life to the fullest, free from death and free from bondage, the bondage that comes from shame, rejection, trauma, and all other forms of injustice. From Bethany to Stonewall, through liberation movements in the past and in the present, we can find freedom and inspiration from communities who actively participate in and advocate for their own unbinding. This week, I watched a great documentary called How to Survive a Plague, which clips together the works of ACT UP New York, an organization of HIV and AIDS positive people in the 80s and 90s, and their allies who worked and protested and advocated tirelessly for more research and better health care for those struggling with what at the time was truly a death sentence. The documentary depicts a group of people who understandably feel a strong sense of anger and despair, watching thousands in their community die every year from an awful virus that was not treated or researched with the same urgency that it may have been otherwise had those affected not been from a community who had faced such severe fear and judgment because of their identity. But even as friends, partners, and neighbors were dying all around them, and as many of them began to fall ill themselves, they refused to go down quietly or to go down without a fight. When they felt they weren't being taken seriously by public health officials, they started small groups among themselves, lay people with no specific scientific training, and just got together and read scientific journals about new experimental treatments that were coming about, things they could recommend to other people that might bring some form of healing. When the NIH and the FDA refused to fast track and approve potentially life-saving drug treatments, the activists showed up at their headquarters and demanded that the virus that would end up killing more than 40 million people worldwide be treated with the seriousness that it deserved. When presidential administrations of the day had no problem ignoring the crisis and tried to let millions of people die quietly, they marched through the streets of Washington and scattered the remains of their loved ones on the lawn of the White House. They gave those in power no choice but to acknowledge their humanity and to take their suffering seriously. When over and over again society attempted to bind them in death and shame, they refused to stay buried. Their work and their activism, without a doubt, played a pivotal role in the life-saving drug treatments that would finally come to market in 1996 and create what many physicians would later refer to as the Lazarus effect among the many patients who were able to live long enough to receive it. Communities stood in awe as some of their members who had appeared on the brink of death were restored back to life and brought from severe illness to a non-detectable level of virus within as short of a time as 30 days. Throughout history, we see examples of communities with the spirit of defiance and liberation working to unbind their fellow community members from death and destruction. I'm still astounded by the story of the Freedom House ambulance service, started in the 1960s by civil rights leaders in the predominantly Black and low-income district of Pittsburgh, known as the Hill District. While it's hard for many of us to imagine now, up until that time, there was no nationwide system of public-run emergency medical transportation that was staffed by paramedics who had anything beyond a basic level of first aid training. In emergency situations, people had to either call the police or the local funeral home to be transported to the hospital. It wasn't a great system to begin with, and a lot of people died unnecessarily on their way to receive medical treatment. And in Black communities in particular, emergency response times could be very slow, and people in the community who did not have good relationships with law enforcement would often hesitate to call for help at all. Seeing the need for something better, local activists paired up with sympathetic physicians within the community to construct the first ever emergency medical transport of its kind. Training the first and all Black staff of paramedics, the Freedom House ambulance service would be so efficient and successful treating the community of Pittsburgh that it would soon become the national standard for the emergency medical care that we all know and benefit from today. As so much around us seems to be enwrapped in chaos, how do we find inspiration and liberation from the communities that have come before us, from Bethany to Pittsburgh to Stonewall? I believe some of our liberation might come from being reminded that no matter how much we feel like we're suffering, there are still ways that we can be invited into participating in our own liberation. While we look for signs of comfort and inspiration from the God that we've gathered here to worship this morning, as the community of Bethany did in the aftermath of Lazarus' death, we can also know that God serves as a presence of inspiration to accomplish that which we are already capable of doing, bringing life back into causes of love and liberation that once seemed dead and hopeless, participating in our own unbinding and the unbinding of those in our community who feel stuck or forgotten. Jesus gives us the command to come out of our tombs of shame and isolation. Jesus gives us the command to unbind each other from the forces of evil and oppression that aim to keep us buried. But we are the ones who must ultimately see this work through to the finish. And as we learned in our story, it's not always easy. They are worthy causes, but the causes have consequences. But yet, we are called to keep pushing forward, even when it's hard, even when it hurts. And if we're looking for present day inspirations, we don't have to look far. We don't have to dig deep into our past to see examples of communities who are actively in the process of their own unbinding. Like our friends today from Bethlehem, we admire and we stand in solidarity with all of our neighbors in Palestine, who have endured a century of colonial violence and occupation, but still refuse to be silent in the wake of their injustice. Through your activism, your art, your spirit of holy defiance, the world sees you and hears you, and calls for your freedom ring out on every corner of the earth. As we meditate on the story of Lazarus and celebrate the beginning of Pride Month, let us carry this same spirit of liberation in all that we do. Let us speak out loudly for the full inclusion of queer and trans people in our churches and in our society. Let us be advocates for ourselves and our neighbors in our moments of oppression and injustice. Let us hear and amplify the voice of God, who calls us out of the tombs of death and despair and into the fullness of life. And with that, we make our way to the table today.